Welcome to Anything But Ordinary with your hosts, Spooky and Raven. Tonight's topic is Gettysburg. I'm your host, Spooky, and here is your other awesome host, Raven. How are you doing tonight, Raven?
Good. Glad to be back. We had to take a little break there for a couple of weeks, but
Yeah, we sure did. But hey, we're back.
right.
And we got a brand new topic.
Yep, and this is what our seventh show, so woohoo for us.
Well, not doing bad.
Right.
We are not doing bad. Tonight we're going to talk about Gettysburg. I'm going to give you a little bit of a history of the Civil War. Prior to 1861, the United States of America were known as separate states that created most of their own rules and regulations, but an ongoing debate as to whether or not to have each state or a singular central government decide issues such as taxation, commerce of products, and in particular, the issue of slavery. The northern states, of course, opposed slavery, while the southern states fully supported the institution, but that was because their economy depended on it. So in 1861, realizing debate could no longer resolve the issue, the southern states seceded from the government and formed their own Confederacy of the States. They even elected their own president, Jefferson Davis. Well, President Lincoln believed a house divided cannot stand, so a civil war broke out to decide whether the U.S. would remain one country or split in two. But of all the battles and all the skirmishes during the Civil War, Gettysburg was the worst. Gettysburg alone, there were 51,000 casualties. That was more than the entire war itself. Matter of fact, I read somewhere that that was even more than all of the soldiers that died in Vietnam. But General Robert E. Lee reasoned that a battle in the North would secure the freedom of the CSA and end the war sooner. So, with 75,000 soldiers, he invaded Gettysburg. And at that time, Gettysburg was just a small rural town.
Right.
It's not like it is today. I'm not sure what the population is, but it's a pretty good sized city now.
I think something like they were saying they outnumbered like 20 to 1 by the dead. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
I know it was. I couldn't believe it when I read that figure, 51,000 in that battle alone, and that battle only lasted 3 days. It
yeah.
was like July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in 1863. And so Gettysburg is arguably, I hope I said that right,
It's okay.
considered the most haunted town in the United States. Now, some people will argue that, but I kind of believe it.
Well, yeah, with that
You
much
know, I
loss
mean,
so
with
quickly.
everything that has happened there, I mean, this was a horrendous battle. 51,000 people dead in 3 days.
I know. That's like what? A person dying every 2 seconds, right?
Something like that.
Every
Yeah.
2 or 3 seconds someone was falling over dead. So I mean that's a lot if you really count it up and think about it. That's horrific.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I'm not good at math, but I'm going to take your word on that. Well, the only known civilian casualty of this whole thing was Jenny Wade. Jenny Wade was actually, I'm sure, you know, everybody that knows anything about Gettysburg and the tours and everything knows about the Jenny Wade house, which is kind of strange because Jenny Wade, that wasn't even her home. That was her sister's home.
Right. She was visiting.
She was visiting. Matter of fact, she was standing in the kitchen kneading bread when a sniper's bullet hit her in the back and she fell dead.
Well, the reason why they started shooting up their house is because a couple of the soldiers went up in their attic and where a sniper was shooting from up there, which caused the attention of the other soldiers to start shooting in that direction, and that's when she got taken out, sadly enough.
Right. right. But her sister had had a baby just a few days before, and so she was there. Her matter of fact, her and her mother both were there to help her sister Georgia, I think was her name, with the baby. But they had this tremendous battle going on around them. So what they did was they took her body to the basement and it laid there for like 2 days
Mhm.
while they were waiting for this battle to die down so they could bury their loved one. And the Jenny Wade house is one of the more popular hauntings in Gettysburg. People say that when they go in there, they not only see an apparition of Jenny Wade, but they'll smell baking bread, which, if you really think about it, it makes sense. I mean, she's standing there cooking bread.
Well, I've never heard of bread lingering in the wood of houses. Now I know cigar smoke and smoke from fireplaces and everything else. That always stays in wood for years and years and years. So, like if someone says I smell cigar smoke, so a spirit's here, I'm like, bah, I don't really think
No,
so. But
because I'll tell you what, you stand and smoke a cigar, you're going to smell like the cigar for a long time. Another interesting apparition, though, in the Jenny Wade house is people claim to see her father, who years before had been declared insane. And Jenny Wade's mother was actually the breadwinner of the household. She was a seamstress. But her father never believed that Jenny Wade was dead, and he used to go down into the basement and look for her. And he believed that she was hiding. And the funny thing,
I got a cough. I'll be right back. Sorry, keep talking.
and it's kind of funny you would even mention cigar smoke, because people claim that they not only see an apparition of this man in the basement and he looks like he's looking for something, but they get the smell of cigar smoke too.
Yeah. Well,
Are
that's
you okay?
yeah. I drank a little weird. The thing is, with cigar smoke and all that. Sorry, can't stop laughing either. But with cigar smoke and stuff, it's like I have a hard time buying that, and fire smoke and everything else. But baking bread, I've never smelled leftover of baking good. If you go into Old Billy and stuff, I'm sure you still don't smell cookies or pies or anything else that was baked there. So that one I would find an interesting smell for sure, though.
I, every once in a while, I get, and I'm not a baker. Anybody that knows me knows that I am not Susie Homemaker, okay?
That's for
But
sure.
I have spirits in this house.
Hmm.
And every once in a while, I get a whiff of baking bread. So I'm pretty sure that my great 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 aunt is probably in there baking bread, because I won't go in there and bake it.
Well,
I buy it
it's
at the store.
well, yeah. Or I make some meals bake for you. But the thing is this woman literally was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
That's
Seriously.
it.
I mean,
She
how
was,
horrible, just be like, oh, I'm going to go over and help. I mean, I always wonder if if she had something, a second thought in her head that said, hey, maybe you should go downstairs real quick or do this. And then she just ignored it. And then,
well, the
pow.
thing of it was too, that it is kind of interesting too, was the bullet went through her corset.
Oh, yeah.
Back then, if you stop and think about it, their weaponry was not that great.
Right.
And a corset, of course, it had
Well, because they were
tight
using
fitting
the,
little thing to make them look thinner,
right.
but it had bones in it.
Yeah, because they have those what do they call them? The mini bullets or whatever they were.
Yeah. And I mean, wearing a corset was almost like wearing a bulletproof vest, but it still went through her corset. And she died almost immediately. I mean, shot in the back.
Sorry. I'm having a bad coughing attack today. It just started up. I don't know why. It was happening to you before we came on the show. Now it switched
Yeah, I
over to
know.
me. I don't know what happened. I apologize to those who are listening, but we'll get through it. It's like one of those weird tickles. But the thing is that I find fascinating is because you stated that some people say that this is like the most haunted place, like ever here, anyways. And to me, I'd kind of believe it as well because, I mean, the place is literally like a lake of blood. I mean, with all that casualty and how much energy and
Exactly.
emotions that people were going through when they were suffering, and I can't
And
even.
you got to stop and think too. A lot of those people laid there and suffer because they didn't die immediately. Like I mentioned before, the weaponry back then was not that great.
Right.
There
Well,
was not a lot of force behind that.
well, no, they just started switching over into the rifles a little bit, and the North had it more so than than the South did. And they had like what I think they used like 1,000 different types of bullets were used for the rifles and pistols back then, but they used to use those mini bullets, and they were like some of them were like just little round circles, and they didn't have that like the high velocity, if I said that word right, that we have
Well,
nowadays. So a lot of the people who were hurt didn't die right away. They just kind of wandered around, you know.
right, they did. A lot of them just walked around with head wounds, just bleeding out.
Right, like they said on the battlefield they used to rope them off in sections, so they would just bounce from one rope to the other until they fell over and bled to death. But they were like the Walking Dead, basically, still in the routine of whatever they were last thinking. That alone, to me, is got to create, what do they call it, residual hauntings, just from that type of
Well, there have been reports though of soldiers just walking around with
aimlessly.
aimlessly,
Yeah.
like they had no purpose. So I agree. That's got to be a residual haunting. Most of the you mentioned rifles. The people that had repeating rifles. I think the most popular one at the time and the better one was the Henry rifle, and that was not even Army issued.
Right.
The people that had those were the people that could afford to buy them. They were their own personal guns. Most of the guns that were issued to the soldiers were muzzle loaders, and some of them had the barrels were smooth, and they call it a smooth bore. And what they used in those, besides powder and a wad, were small balls,
Right.
and they
Well, that's like the mini bullets. They're little light lead.
the mini bullets were used in the barrels, the guns that were rifled on the inside. And rifled is when there are grooves in the barrel.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And what it did when you fired them,
It would heat up and then give it like a light slight
right,
spin.
and when the bullet come out, it was spinning,
Right.
which gave it more velocity and more power behind it. Where with just the balls in the smoothbore rifles,
Mm-hmm.
that you could shoot somebody with them, but the bullet was not very accurate, and there wasn't that much velocity behind it.
Yeah.
Velocity, I
Yeah.
will get that word out right in a minute. And it didn't kill you right away, because there were soldiers that ended up with several bullets in them was still fighting.
Yeah. Well, exactly. 'Cause it took them a while for them to bleed. Well, I'm not trying to be
I'm not trying to be
graphic or whatever.
graphic,
but
right?
Yeah, I don't want to go that route or whatever. But yeah, seriously. But it's just like I can't even imagine being there for those 3 days with that much life loss. You know what I mean?
Can you imagine the blood on that field?
I'm not just there. The
And
whole
a lot of the
everywhere.
soldiers just lying there. 51,000 dead soldiers. And
That's almost like a small suburb. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Robert E. Lee took 75,000 in. General George Meade took another 75, 80,000 in. So we're talking, about 150,000 soldiers, and a third of them were killed.
Right.
And that's not counting the wounded
Right.
or the ones that were wounded and died later.
Well, yeah, after surgery, because I mean, even if it was like a minor injury, they were just chopping people left and right just to do a quick, clean cut and go. Let's just go, 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 go. Even if they didn't need to be amputated. It was just. And what happened to all that? It's like I'm sure just that all that stuff is just scattered all over there. So that alone's got to leave some type of energy and whatever they call it left behind. I've never been.
Right.
Have you been there? I've never been to Gettysburg.
I have not been there. It's on my to-do list, but I have talked to people who have been there, and they say that it's an awesome place to go.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that I get out there in the next couple years anyway. Another famous haunting out there is at a place called the Devil's Den.
Oh yeah.
The Devil's Den is boulders, these giant boulders. And the reason it's called the Devil's Den
Mhm.
is because the soldiers were all there taking shelter in there, and a snake crawled out. They said it was the biggest black snake they'd ever seen in their lives. Usually a black snake is like 5 foot long. They said this thing was about 7 foot long, so they named it the Devil.
A big. Yeah.
So it's the Devil's Den. And
I think I also heard that that before the war and everything, there was hauntings by the place we were just
okay,
talking about, because I think
years
Indians were there was like some Indian thing that
year
happened there.
that's right. That's right. Years before, that was the scene of a huge battle of the
Right.
Crow Indian.
Yeah.
So part of the hauntings there are war hoops and Indians yelling and Indian drums.
Mhm.
So along with seeing Confederate and Union soldiers there. So this is kind of a double deal. There's a double whammy on this.
Right. That's what I kind of heard too, that they were actually seeing that the soldiers were actually seeing things and hearing things
Right.
prior before. So.
Yeah, while they were all trying to take shelter in this place, which actually turned out to be a bad place to take shelter.
Right.
But they say that even cameras don't work properly there. And some people have reported that cameras were knocked out of their hands to the ground. But one of the interesting hauntings and this is the reason why I brought up the Devil's Den mainly, there was a lot of people reported that they would be out there looking at this place, and all of a sudden this real friendly soldier or a guy dressed in I think it's a Confederate uniform, would be around this place, and they would actually stand there and talk to this guy and have a conversation with him, and they would they would have their pictures taken with him. They thought he was a reenactor. But when
Wow.
they would get home and develop their film, there would be nobody in the picture.
Wow, that's a pretty active spirit. I've never. That would.
That's a very intelligent haunting. I mean,
Yeah.
this thing is interacting with the people that go to this boulder.
I wonder if. Well, I wonder if any of them touched him, or were like super close up, or he was just. That would be interesting. It'd be
that would be
interesting to
interesting
talk
know.
to somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to actually talk to somebody who had that experience more so than just reading the stories on the internet, because the internet's like the grapevine, everything grows bigger or whatever. But
Oh
that
yeah,
would be
absolutely.
actually be cool to actually find somebody who actually had a one-on-one encounter with that. Actually,
I never found any stories about. I found stories about this friendly soldier, and cameras not working in the area and around this boulder and everything. But not one time did I find this, and people talking to him. But not one time did I find anything that stated that they touched him or he touched them, or even that you would think that somebody would want their picture taken with this guy. I didn't even
right,
find a story about that. The
right.
only thing that they said was that when they got home and developed their film, that there was no one in the picture.
Hmm. That's weird. Well, I know there's a couple of people who are always out there doing investigations. I think they're from the area or whatever. And this one guy, he's developed his camera where he can actually take daytime photos where they look like it's nighttime. And he
Yeah.
had captured two spirits at this place that you're talking about. One was walking towards the boulders, and one was on top of the boulders. But he had like he would always take 3 photos. You know what I mean? And
Right.
and it only showed up in the middle folder or photo, not the first one and not the last one. But the funny thing is the one that was walking towards the boulder, his legs had casted a shadow, but not the rest of him. His torso and everything else did not cast a shadow, but his legs did. Now, I saw that on the internet, and I actually saw it on one of those paranormal shows that they on History Channel or whatever, those things like that. But I always thought that was really fascinating. You know what I mean?
Well, see, I do that when
Because
I
I've
went.
never known a spirit to cast a shadow before either. You know, that's what I found interesting
I've
about
seen it one. I've seen it one, maybe two times.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I do though. When I'm on an investigation and I'm snapping pictures, I will take three,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll take them, just as quick as I can, because if and something usually shows up in at least one of them if there's something there. But this one photo that I have, and I posted it in our group, it's I was in this place and I saw this painting, and for some reason I snapped three pictures of this painting, and there was a man's face in all three of them. But the very first one, it was a profile, and then the other two, he was looking toward me. It was almost like when I snapped his picture, he turned and looked at me. And there were no men in the house that night, no men in our group. But anyway, sorry.
No, that's okay. You were just relating with this one person the way that he investigates, so I understand. But it helps prove his case because he had three photos straight in a row, and only one of them had captured this. And there's no way that, and he had other people with him that were taking photos behind him, and there was nobody up there. So I think you can probably find that photo on the internet, but I still find that as one of the interesting ones because one of the spirits actually casted a partial shadow. And I never known them to be able to do that before, so that's one of those things I'd want to try out myself.
That'd be really cool if all that was there was the legs casting shadows and nothing else there. I've seen that too.
That would freak a bunch of people out, though. Could you imagine? So
I've seen that at least once, where not that they were casting shadow, but saw the legs and didn't see the rest of it. That kind of freaked me out. Another place that is reputed to be haunted is the Farnsworth house. Now, the Farnsworth house, it's that close to the battlefield. Matter of fact, it is a working bed and breakfast. And some of the things heard in this place are footsteps, and a few apparitions are seen. But one of the interesting things about the place is that it still has all the original woodwork, all the original ceiling work, and there are over 100 bullet holes from the battle in this house.
Oh yeah, it's like all across this one wall. I remember seeing that.
And rather than cover them up, and it's kind of strange that what Gettysburg was like 150 years ago, and in 150 years these bullet holes are still visible. Nobody ever thought to put plaster, plug them
I
up
think
or
they
anything.
didn't want to. I think they wanted to leave everything exactly the way it was for historical purposes, really.
I don't know. I just find it kind of strange that would you live in a house with bullet holes?
Well, I guess if that's all I could afford.
Nowadays, though, I can see where it's kind of where it would draw people.
Well,
I mean,
right.
not only that, I mean, staying in a haunted bed and breakfast. Some people, I have to laugh at these people that go to these places knowing they're haunted, and then in the middle of the night, if they see something or something touches them, they get up and leave because they're scared.
Yeah, leave half their clothes and flee town.
Jump up, pee their pants, and run out the door saying, "Hey, send me a bill."
Yeah, keep the bill. I don't. Yeah, that happens a lot actually. When you listen to people who have those haunted places, you wouldn't believe how many people run out and flee and leave half of their stuff behind. So.
Oh, I know, and over half of them are people that specifically look for these places to stay because they want so much to have a paranormal experience, and then when they have one, it scares the pants off of them.
Mm-hmm.
And they take off running out like little kids.
Little kids might be braver than adults. So
well, they might be, but it always comes down to be careful what you ask for. You just may get it.
Right.
Another place near the battlefield is the Cemetery Lodge. Now, this was a building at the time where it held all of the unclaimed property of the dead soldiers, and it held them for many years. I think they were in there. I think clothing and hats and even guns and stuff. And I think they were in there for like 10 years or so. I don't quite remember.
See, I heard
But
like some of the people that were forced to clean up, take care of the bodies or whatever, you know, of the opposite side were like the farmers and the black farm hands, whatever, and I heard that they would actually keep the items of these people and enforce
oh, I'm sure
the
some of them did.
enforce the family members to pay them money, and then they would give them the body, and then they could take them, basically kind of hold them for ransom, because a lot of them lost a lot of their farm and their crops and their buildings and animals, and you know what I mean. So
Right.
I think that
Well,
they did
yeah.
that, or they just burnt the bodies too because they were so angry. So it was kind of all the way around was horrific, really.
Well, even back then there were souvenir hunters.
Yeah.
Even back then, I mean, I had a friend that went out there, and they said people get out there with metal detectors and all kinds of things just looking for souvenirs. It was a war. It was a big battle there in this sleepy little town. But
Well, they also would, and also I'm sure they didn't bury a lot of people. They probably just threw them up on a pile and just started a fire because to stop diseases too. But I mean, to
yeah,
die,
but a lot of bodies laid out in the fields until they were just skeletons.
right,
A lot didn't even get buried.
or burned, but I mean, to try to stop some of the diseases and everything else, you think about it. I mean, but one, they die horrifically. Some of them didn't even believe in the fight that they were doing, so they thought they were going
Right.
to go to hell anyway. You know, I think that might explain why a lot of them staying around, because they probably are afraid of, what they think they're going to be judged for or whatever. And then and not to be buried properly or be brought back home. I mean, there's so many factors that weigh into why this place could be the most
Well,
haunted place.
actually, up until the Civil War, it was hard to ship a body home because of decomposition. Um, uh, Embalming was, I don't want to say perfected, but I guess for back then it was perfected. Just for the purpose of making sure that the bodies kind of stayed intact to ship them home.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's such a
Because at the time, this was considered a modern war because of the so-called technology. I have to laugh every time I think about that. But I'm sure for the
well, at
time,
the time the North had far more advanced weapon, as far as the bullets
for the
and the
time, yeah.
rifles that they had. They had
Oh, the South was definitely outgunned.
for
I
sure.
mean, yeah, because
Well, the North,
their rifles were not that good.
mm-mm. Well, they didn't really have rifles. They had those muskets and whatever else back then. You know what I'm saying?
And like I said earlier, those that could afford it had they had swords, they had knives, and for those that could afford it, they had a repeating rifle, and mostly the Henry rifle,
Mm-hmm.
and their handguns.
They had the rifle back then. The repeat. I didn't know they had the Henry was back then.
Yeah, they had Henry rifles back then.
I didn't know
They
Henry
were.
was. That's cool.
I no, I'm I don't know if I'm correct on this, but I believe they were lever action,
Hmm.
but they were still uh, more modern than the muzzle loaders.
Well, yeah, but that's when I think that they were really starting to.
I think that's when the repeating rifle was really coming in to its time.
I forgot this guy's name, but he was one of the people up north that he was really working on the ammunition and bettering the bullet and whatever with the rifle, and that's why the North really had far more better ammunition and armory.
Well,
Whatever
a
you want
lot
to
of them
call it.
had the Navy Colt, which was really for the Navy, specifically made for the Navy. But a lot of them, a lot of the especially the officers preferred that because at the time it was a better handgun,
Mhm.
and they had the North had Gatling gun, which was the machine gun of the time.
Right. Well, it doesn't match with the stuff that we have nowadays, and that's why it's like a lot of people would just have, like you said, they'd be shot up a few times and they'd still be wandering for a good while before they passed on. So I can only imagine, everything
Really.
else. Well, and then we were also talking. Well, you were going to talk about the Humiston.
Yeah. Sergeant Amos Humiston. He was, his body was found. They found this Union soldier. He died on the battlefield, and he had no identification on him. Nobody knew who he was, and all he had on his person was an ambrotype of three children, his three children. So a local girl found this photo, and she put it up in her dad's tavern. Well, a Dr. J. Borns, I believe his name is, saw it in her father's tavern, and he had this image copied onto a CVD. Oh gosh, any other time I would know this. It's a small cardboard-like photo. It's a photo on cardboard,
Mm-hmm.
basically. And I'm screwing up on this, and Jack Mord is in the audience tonight, and he has a site called the Thanatos Archives, and he knows all about this, so he knows I'm screwing up. But anyway,
Well, maybe that's why you're a little nervous, but.
that's probably it. Hadn't seen him for a while. Hi, Jack. Uh, but anyway, this Dr. Borns had this image copied, and he had it publicized.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This image made it all the way up to New York, where this woman named Felinda Humiston saw it in a local newspaper. So she got a hold of, she contacted this Dr. Borns, and she confirmed that the photograph was of her three children. Carta Vista. Thank you, Jack. That was her three children. Well, so she went down to Gettysburg to claim the photo, to claim the original photo. Well, while she was down there, she was kind of taken in by all of these orphans and homeless children in the streets.
Right, of all the soldiers and families
Yeah,
that had died
children
and
of the soldiers.
dispersed.
And
Yeah.
back then, the thing of it is, back then, even if the mother was still living, if the father was killed, you were considered an orphan. But this is back at a time when women really had no rights. They couldn't hold property. They couldn't vote. That women didn't get the vote until 1920.
Yeah.
They couldn't even hold. They couldn't even get property in their name until I think the late 1890s. So, so all of these children, she was really, really touched by all of these children in the street, all these orphans. But Dr. Borns had been trying to establish an orphanage.
Right, so he used this as a good opportunity to
Ex-
get people's hearts and everything into it, and they kind of started giving donations from the rich and those who weren't rich to help build
Exactly.
this
He
orphanage.
started in 1866. He established the National Homestead of Gettysburg. And for 3 years, he was trying to get funding, which people did donate to this because he wanted to open up an orphanage. And the home that he used, it was this huge house owned by a J. George Wolfe. And at the time, during the battle, it was also used as the headquarters for Major General George Meade.
Yeah, didn't they use part of it for a hospital too, though? I thought I heard.
Part of it was used for a hospital. It was used as a headquarters. I mean, this was a huge home.
Right.
And so that's where they started this orphanage. It was actually started out as an orphanage and widow's home. And they started out with 20 orphans. But he secured funding for all of this. And he hired Felinda Humiston as the first matron of this place. Now, she did everything she could. Her and her family moved in. And her daughter, she had two sons and a daughter. And her daughter, there was a a rock wall around the place or near the place, and her daughter loved to run up and down this wall. And that's one of the hauntings. There is people have still claim that they see a little girl running up and down this rock wall.
Wow.
So anyway, her and her family moved in,
Mhm.
and she took very good care of the children. And
And that's the
of
picture I
course,
have up now, is that place that you're talking about.
right,
But they
that's the
also,
orphanage that's up now.
but I think the photo that is up now is the ones that after it's been added on a few times, though, because they had converted the barn and connected the buildings together over time, though, and got it bigger, is what I read.
Right. Sorry, I was reading something Jack wrote. But he says he has a CD Carton Vista of Humiston. But anyway, Felinda Humiston took good care of these kids. She made sure that they had what they wanted. They were treated well. I mean, it was just, if you had to be in an orphanage, it was the place to be. But she was only there for like 3 years. And she got married, she remarried, and she relocated to Massachusetts. So for a while, Dr. Bourne ran this place. And one of the reasons that Felinda Humiston left the place was because Dr. Bourne was embezzling the funds. She didn't quite have enough to really take care of the children properly, but she did the best she could, and she was a kind woman.
Mhm.
Well, he ran the place for a while, and he was abusive. He did not treat the kids well. Some of the kids would go hungry. They had little clothing to wear, and some of the children didn't even have shoes. And then in 1869, he brought in Rosa Carmichael.
Ugh. Yeah.
This woman was the epitome of evil. She moved in,
Well, she's the one in
and
the middle, right? Of the photo. She's the one with
is
the
the
black
picture.
dress. Yeah, I threw it up.
Okay, she is the one in the middle in the black dress.
Okay.
She was absolutely sadistic in her treatment of these kids. These kids were just absolutely afraid of her. And she would starve them. She would beat them. She even had one of the older boys, a 19-year-old, that she made taskmaster, and he would like kick and beat the kids,
Well, she also
and she would stand there and
yeah.
laugh.
But there's other boys and girls that were older that they'd call them the stick boys or whatever, and these people would just beat the kids and stuff. But
this one particular 19-year-old
Mhm.
that she made a taskmaster, he was as sadistic as she was. And when he was beating and kicking these children, she would stand there and laugh. She was turned in one time for child abuse and paid a $20 fine. Now, back then, $20 was a lot of money.
I think she was actually twice, from what I heard. She was actually went in
Right.
twice.
Right. But after the first time, once she paid the $20, she went back and things got worse. They just got absolutely worse.
Well, she went in the
She
first
was-
time, and she was told to put her hand on the Bible and she to say she'd swear she'd never do it again, and because she was
Right.
a female, that's why. And she said, "Oh yeah, I'll never do it again." And that's when she went back and was just heck of a worse.
Well, being a female, they really didn't want to put her in jail, I guess. You know, back then, even though women couldn't vote or hold property, it was, you know, I mean, they still kind of, unless she did something really, really, really terrible,
Mhm.
like murder, they really didn't want to put them in prison because really they had no place to put them.
Well, she did.
They didn't
do
have
murder.
women's prisons back then.
Yeah, but she did.
But
do
they would
murder,
take
though.
them, well, the ones that did commit murder were put in men's prisons until they were hanged.
Yeah, I know, but she did. She killed. I mean,
She did end up, some of the children ended up missing.
right. Well,
Okay.
and they did find
And
a
they were
skeleton of a young
they were
boy,
never
though.
heard from. But nobody checked on this orphanage. Nobody checked on what they were doing. And in 1870, the state of Pennsylvania started sending funds to this orphanage. And they didn't even come down and inspect the place or check the place out. They just passed a bill through their Senate, and it was passed unanimously to send funding to this orphanage.
Right. Well, a couple of people are curious of what she did. Maybe you can tell them a little bit of what she was
She
doing to
would
the
beat
kids.
them, she would starve them. Some children run around naked, they didn't have any clothes. When she punished them, she would put them in the basement and chain them to a wall. They'd be chained to this wall, could barely have enough space to turn around, and they had to eat chained to this wall. They sat in the dirt, they slept in the dirt, they were down in the dark.
Right.
Some children in the winter time, she would lock them in an outhouse or an outbuilding and make them stay out there all night long in the winter, in the bitter cold. And as a matter of fact, one child that she locked in an outhouse, he was out there screaming, and it just so happens there were two men walking by that investigated, and they found this little boy in this outhouse.
Well, that's because a guy
and
was
he was
walking.
naked.
Well, that's
He
because a
was
guy was
naked in
walking
there.
by. A guy was walking by. He heard the screaming and help from this child, and that's why he was walking by. But I mean, she also tried to
I mean, locking a naked child,
in the winter. Yeah.
and this child was only like 6 or 7 years old. He wasn't very old.
Well, they used to chain him to the fences in the hottest summer, and people got burnt and
Right.
drowned.
They would chain him to the fence in the summertime, in the hottest part of the day. They would
barrels of water.
leave
She
them
put
out
them
there
in.
all day long, no water, no food.
Well, then she also put them in
it was
barrels of
just
water
torture.
to drown. She put them in barrels of water where they had to stand up until they finally fell over and drowned. Or just all this horrific stuff. I'm sure there's tons of more sadistic things that this person did that people are even unaware of. And the thing that gets me is back then they just let anybody. You're like, oh, you're a woman, go ahead, and we trust you, and nobody ever checked up
There
on
were
her.
not very many jobs for women back then.
But they just assumed that all women would just be so loving and caring, and nobody really
just because they were women.
Yeah, and nobody really knows. I mean, was this her real name? I mean, nobody knows where she came from. Nobody knows where she went to either. There's no history that you can find about this woman anywhere. And not just us looking, but tons of people have looked who are, historians and really avid into this Civil War stuff, don't even know where she came from or who she's attached to, or if that was really her real name. She just came out of nowhere.
And children were dying in this place and nobody knew it. Nobody even missed them. And there wasn't a word said. This was supposed to be an orphanage and widows' home. There was not one word said about any widows that lived there. It was all children. And by the time funding came from the state of Pennsylvania, there was something like 50 children in this place.
In a way, it seems like they'd have been better off if the orphanage never existed, really, because they probably would have been better off going to random people's houses.
And then you had the bookkeeper, Dr. Bournes, who was embezzling the money, and these children were starving because there wasn't enough money to feed them all.
Right, and there were so many horrific things that she was doing to all these kids that are, from 3 and up,
Yeah.
And it's like, they say that people who stay there now in that area, they hear and see children and just screaming and crying for help and.
And the thing that gets me is back then, like I said, if the mother was still living, they were still considered orphans. If the father was killed, they were considered orphans, even if the mother was still living. Why did these mothers abandon their children? Where did they go?
I don't know. Maybe
because not all of them were completely parentless.
No, but it's weird because you think that you would kind of. Well, maybe some of them may have given them up, thinking that the orphanage would have been a better place for them because they couldn't provide. 2, I would think that normally they would stay with the mom because they could help with farm work and everything else because everybody worked together as, it's a unit back then for, they had a farm or whatever. But Or maybe they got remarried and couldn't keep the kids. I have no idea. There's so many.
Well, I wouldn't marry a guy that wouldn't have my kids.
Well, back
And did they
then,
even go and visit these children?
I don't know. That's interesting, but maybe
Yeah.
they didn't have. I don't know. It's hard to say really. Each case, each kid there, I'm sure had a different reason why they were there. So.
Well, I'm sure they did, but it just kind of boggles my mind a little bit that these children were just basically given up. I'm sure some of them were parentless. I'm sure later on quite a few of them were. But a lot of these kids in there, when this place first started, some of these kids had a mother. Where did she go?
Well, some of them
But
could have died, from sicknesses back then. They could have got shot during the war too. Maybe they were nurses and something happened to them. It's really hard to say because what was there only maybe a total of 100 kids in there anyway, 50, 60. How many orphans were there at this place?
I think by the time there was um, like 100 kids in there, close to it.
Right.
The place was overcrowded. I mean, even as big as this place was, it was overcrowded.
And that's when they
Um,
started adding the barn and other buildings and started attaching them. So yeah, I could see that, but I know it didn't last very long. She kind of basically brought it all down to its knees. This
well, this place
crazy
started in
woman.
1866, and like I said, by excuse me, by 1870, the state of Pennsylvania was funding this place. But of course, back then, they didn't go in and inspect these places like they do now, because now in places like this, you have to have a food sanitation certificate, you have to be licensed, you have to be inspected, and all this other stuff.
Well, you'd be
And you have
surprised.
and you have to
Yeah.
open up your books to tell where your money's going. Back then, you didn't have all of this.
Yeah.
People thought, I'm sure people thought, well, these kids aren't on the street. We don't have to do anything for them. We'll put, they're in the orphanage, out of sight, out of mind.
Well, that's basically what it kind of really was. Nobody really. They didn't have really good child laws back then. Children weren't, and women weren't really treated very well back then. And orphanages to this day aren't 100% great either. I mean, there's still issues
No,
up
they're not.
today. You know what I mean? So,
I think a lot of them are ran by religious organizations. I don't know.
well, I'm not.
I don't. This state doesn't have a state orphanage,
Mhm.
but you have foster care now.
But I could see why after this woman's seen all this horrific things to all these children. I'm thinking if I was a kid there and we got a bunch of other kids, you think that we would all come together and.
These children had to have been terrified not to
Well, you said they were
tell
chained
on
in the
them, but one
basement too,
kid,
though.
one kid did though. The one they found in the outhouse, he was. Let's see, my notes say he was 5 years old. He was locked in the outhouse in the bitter cold, and two passing men just happened to hear his screams, and they let him out. Well, this kid started telling them what was going on.
Yeah,
A
from
5-year-old kid.
them being chained in the basement and
He
water
told about
torture and
chained in the basement, chained to the fence in the summertime. He was telling them all kinds of things.
telling them their kids had disappeared and were died, and
Yeah. And so these two men took him to the authorities. Well, the authorities finally went in there and inspected this place. And they charged Rosa Carmichael. They arrested her and they fined her again. And after the second time Rosa Carmichael left town, she was never heard from again. Nobody knows where she went. Nobody knows when she died. The woman just disappeared, just like the children that ended up missing in this. They went through the list of children, and there were children on the list that weren't even in the orphanage. And the only conclusion they could come to is that these children were dead.
see, I
I
thought
didn't
she
read
got.
anything about finding graves or anything like that.
See, I thought she got busted because a boy came to visit his friend at the orphanage, and Rosa said that he had died very sudden, and there's nothing that she could do about it. And then that kid went back home and told his father, and then the father went around to the local doctors to see how the young boy died, and every doctor in Gettysburg said that they didn't have no kid from the orphanage that they took care of. So then the father became suspicious, and that's when he contacted the local authorities. And then they
But the
went
local authorities didn't do anything at that time.
right, and then that's when they
Nothing was really done until this kid was found in the outhouse in the dead of winter, freezing. But yeah, I know the
but
story
see,
you're
well
talking
then
about.
that's when I heard. Then that's when they went to question her, and she said that the doctor was just one of those doctors that was passing through, and he left that night, whatever.
Hmm.
And then the cops were like, okay, well, that's believable back then, because that's kind of like
Well,
it
yeah, back
happened.
then, that was believable because there were some doctors that just went from town to town. That's how they, it was like the preachers back then. The preachers would go town to town.
Hmm.
Not every, the preachers had this area that they went to that they served, preached in the churches. Every Sunday when you went to church, unless you knew for a fact the pastor was in town, somebody else taught the service.
Right.
And then the preacher, he stayed in the home of one of the parishioners.
Right. And
Doctors did that back then too. They traveled from town to town.
yeah, because they only had one for like maybe 4 or 5 towns that were close by, and that could be like really far, hundreds of miles. But I think you're right. I think the second time around is when those two guys or guy found that other kid in the bathroom, or not bathroom, outhouse.
The authorities went
Apologize.
down in the basement, found these kids. I think they found something like 10 kids chained to the wall down there.
Yeah.
And some of these kids hadn't eaten for a couple of days.
I'm sure they probably didn't eat for a
And the
lot
kids
of
were
days.
dirty. The kids were so dirty they weren't even sure what race the kids were. And when they charged her, she left town. She just up and left town without looking back.
Right. Well, they did eventually find that one skeleton of the young boy
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
under
they did.
under the orphanage, so it was like down in the
Right.
basement and whatnot. So, but imagine it's dark. There's no electricity. They're down there, and there's no windows down in back in the basements. Back, it's just like a cellar. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And these little kids are tortured, chained, and left alone sometimes just by themselves.
And they're down there in the dark. They
Right.
can't see anything. I mean, I'm sure after a while their eyes adjusted to the dark, but they're down there where they're breathing in this dust from the dirt. And I find it interesting too that the children that were missing and were never heard from again, I'm sure some of them ran away.
I hope
But
so.
I'm sure that some of them were killed too. Where were they buried? Now they did find the skeleton of one that was buried
In the,
because it was a dirt floor,
right.
buried in the cellar.
Right.
I wonder if they dug that cellar up to see if they could find more,
Well,
or if they just didn't want to bother.
They also asked her, the cops, I think it was the second time, also asked her, said, well, where's the, she said, well, he died, so I buried him, out back or whatever. And they said, well, where is the grave? And she's like, well, I don't remember. So it was just a bunch of runaround that she was giving them, and I think she
Oh,
knew,
I'm sure she did.
she knew then that it was basically she had lost her free ride there and her sadistic joy, if you want to call it. It was sick, but, I can't imagine that she could be there for that long, and it would take somebody that long to notice. It took a kid to tell his dad, and another kid screaming, and somebody walking by for them to even take notice that these children were going through this torture, because the place wasn't it like almost like near town or in town anyway?
It was right on the edge of town, I believe. It was the reason that what did I say his name was? Wolf, Mr. Wolf.
Yes.
The reason that he left the house was because the battle was getting so close to him, it basically ran him out.
Yeah.
So he left the home. He did give permission for it to be used for Meade's headquarters. It was also used as kind of a makeshift hospital, but later they moved the hospital to what was the name of that place?
That college, wasn't it? The college?
No, Hummelbau House.
Oh yes.
It was used as that place was used as a basic operating room because it was near the front lines. And then the barn at the, I'm terrible with name, Weaker House, Weikер house, their barn was used as the hospital later on. It was kind of a makeshift hospital, although I can't imagine a barn being used as a hospital.
Hey, back then, any building or basement or cellar that they could drag a body in to try to work on them right quick and not get shot out in the open worked. That's basically what you had to do because, like you said, 51. What did you say? 51,000
51,000
people
dead.
died in 3 days. And like I said, that's got to be what 2 to 3 seconds. Somebody was shot every 3 seconds. So
And like I said, that
you
doesn't
drug them
count.
in wherever you could to do surgery or cut off a limb or whatever. I'm not trying to
Well,
be
yeah.
graphic, but that's I mean, that's what happened. That's horrific. Oh,
Well, yeah, some hospitals were tents,
yeah.
you know, or well, morgues were tents. I've seen several Civil War photos where the morgue was a tent, but that's 51,000 dead. 51,000 in 3 days. That's not counting the wounded.
Right, and that's not counting before these 3 days and after. But that's and then going through this. Well, we should take a quick break though, because we're at the halfway mark. But and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the ghosts and stuff.
Yeah, one more thing. When the authorities went into the orphanage and they inspected it and found all of this, they closed it in 1878. So this place operated from 1866 to 1878. And all but 3 years of that, these children they were tortured, they were beaten, they were starved.
Who knows everything? I mean,
who knows everything that happened to these children?
They were probably burnt. They were left to melt in the sun. Then they were frozen, and locked in the darkness in the basement. I mean, I'm sure she did a heck of a lot worse that people don't even know about. I couldn't believe that nobody came to even at one time that didn't live there come to check on the children or do anything. Even like a church person coming by, you think they'd come by and see the children or somebody, but it's like nobody did nothing. It just seems really odd that this was going on for so long.
Well, it's like I said, out of sight, out of mind. They didn't have to take care of them. They didn't have kids begging in the street. They, their peaceful little town didn't have these, because let's face it, even today, you see homeless people turn their head. They don't want to know that it goes on. And I think that's what a lot of it was. These kids were out of sight, out of mind. Somebody else was taking care of them. They didn't have to contend with them. And it just, so they didn't give it a second thought.
Right.
They just didn't give it a second thought. We're going to take a quick break. For those of you listening on Ustream, if you scroll down to our URL, you can come into the chat room and listen and talk with some really good people, and we will be back shortly.
In 3 minutes, yeah.
Break down the awkwardness, put on my boots and a lily white dress. A million words, but how to express what I'm feeling when I see you. You flash a smile, I'm like, is this happening? I look your way and then of course drop everything. You walk over and ask if I'm alright. Hey, whatever it takes to break the ice. This put this right. Don't overcomplicate, just say hi, or whatever it takes to break the ice. Don't walk away, there's more to say. I just need the courage to let you know what's on my mind. Like every time you pass by, something just feels right. Not apathy, it's energy locked up, that's ready to scream and shout. I won't make the same mistake twice. I'm ready to shake up and break the ice. Do you have a roadmap that I can try? 'Cause I think I just got lost in your eyes. I have to tell you, I really want to. Whenever I look in your eyes, I won't make the same mistake twice. I'm ready to shake up and break the ice. Don't walk away, there's more to say. I just need the courage to let you know what's on my mind. Like every time you pass by, something just feels right. Not apathy, it's energy locked up, that's ready to scream and shout. I won't make the same mistake twice. Ready to shake up and break the ice.
Welcome back to the second half of our show of Anything But Ordinary with Spooky and Raven. I'm Raven, and here's Spooky.
Okay, now we're going to talk about the hauntings of the orphanage.
Yeah, we got through all the history part. And now
We
we're
got
gonna-
through all the history.
Yeah, we lost a couple people before we could get to the ghost part, but we had to tell a little bit of the history part so people knew what we were getting at, so they knew why there
Well, I
were so many
kind of understand.
hauntings.
Well, personally, I don't know about anybody else, but I like listening to the history of a place. You know, when I would watch the ghost hunter shows and stuff on TV, I watch very few of them anymore because I think a lot of them are ridiculous. But
Or just repetitive, but I mean,
or just repetitive. But my favorite part was listening to the history of the place.
yeah.
But there have been reports of chains, because there are still chains on the wall of this place rattling. They could hear children whispering. They can hear children crying in the basement. They hear footsteps just about all through this place. You know, it's like little kids running, and sometimes they say that it sounds like bare feet, little bare feet running across the floor. In the like I mentioned before, the wall behind the place, the rock wall, there has been reports of a young girl running along the top of this wall. I'm guessing it was a wide enough wall for her to run across,
Well, when
run
you're
down
barefoot-
the length of.
Yeah, when you're barefoot and you're a kid, you can.
You know what? When you're a kid, you can run across just about anything. It don't matter what it is, and you can do it barefoot.
Right, until
Try
somebody,
doing that. Try doing that after you're 25 and see how good it feels.
Some still do. They just have liquid courage in them, so they're a little crazy when they're in their 20s. But they say that they've seen. There's people who still go there, you know, in Gettysburg today, and they see little kids still dressed back in that day where they're, you know, barefoot and that same type of outfits that you're talking about. You know, this being right in the open road in
Right.
town.
Right. There have been reports of children in the Jenny Wade house, and the reason for that is because the Jenny Wade house was opened to the children of the orphanage for treats and food or just, you know, whatever. And so they said that when you go to the Jenny Wade house, that the spirit of a child has been known to take people by the hand and walk with them on the tour. I find that pretty cool, personally.
That would see these stories that you talk about. That would be great to actually run into the people who had these experiences more so
I
than
know.
just reading it on the internet. Because that would be cool to actually talk to somebody who said, you know, oh my gosh, this happened to me, where you're not just reading like it passed down through word of mouth, you know. I know it does happen, but it'd be cooler just to actually, you know, talk
You
to
know, when
that
I was in
person.
school and my favorite subject was U.S. history, I love U.S. history. And we would hear about Gettysburg. That was one of the things that we heard about. We didn't hear, they didn't tell us in school that 51,000 people died. They didn't tell us in school about this orphanage that, you know, was there. They didn't even really cover a lot of these battles. And I just think the history of this place is just so fascinating. The whole town, practically the whole town,
Well, every
is
building,
haunted.
well, because every building was, any building that was available that they could use to fix and work on the wounded, they used it. Every floor was covered with, and I'm not trying to be graphic, but this is what happened, was covered with blood. I mean, they had shows where people were taking black lights in, and they had, air quote unquote, mediums come in and say, right here in this spot, so and so is hurt here, whatever. Well, this one guy went back with black lights in the same spot, and every spot that she was sitting in, with the way she was sitting, you could see the outline of the blood, like where it ran down their leg, and you could see where the leg was. They had fingerprints, like of blood stains onto the floor and stuff.
Yeah.
So I mean, everywhere there was
And
used for
some
a
people that
hospital
have
or
been on
whatever.
the, some people have been that have been, by the way, the place now is a museum. It's the National Soldiers Museum. So
Oh, the
you can,
orphanages, yeah.
so you can go in and take a tour of this place. And some people have even said that when they were in the basement taking, you know, the tour down there, that they have seen small bare feet print.
Footprint. Oh, like children's footprints down in
Yeah,
the
like
dirt.
children's footprints in the dirt, which, but, and some people have reported that now the dirt is almost, and it does because in this house, you know, the basement was dirt.
Mhm.
And over the years, if you walk across it enough, it packs down so hard, it's almost like cement. You can't even get a shovel in it.
Right. Well, that's from years and years of use. You'd think that it would be hard as cement by now
Oh, yeah.
there in that basement at that place, because it's, what, over 200 years old probably?
But they have heard chains on the wall shake down there. They've heard children crying. They've heard children crying all through this place. They have seen apparitions of children. And some people have even claimed to see an apparition of a woman in a long black dress that others think may be Rosa Carmichael. Nobody knows where this woman went. She just disappeared.
Well, nobody knows where she came from either. And you don't,
Yeah, that's it.
and
Nobody
nobody
knows where she came from either.
well, yeah, but nobody, you don't really know for sure that was her real name. Maybe she just gave a fictitious name and came up and said, "Oh yeah, I'll take this job." I mean, maybe
It makes you
maybe
wonder.
she had bounced from town to town from other places,
I know, it
being a
makes you
sadistic
wonder.
person, you know.
It makes you wonder how many places like this that she was in charge of, that she had to leave town, that she was ran out of town.
Right? Maybe not even,
Or she left town before anything was discovered.
right.
It just makes you wonder about this woman, if that was even her real name.
Like
How
she was, like,
many,
not a spree killer, but, you know, somebody who just roamed around and was harming people. I mean, I'm sure this wasn't her first time, first experience.
oh, I'm sure it wasn't her first time.
And probably wasn't
I-
her last either.
The
when
more
she left
the more
there.
I read into this story, the more I'm convinced this was not the first time for her. She had done this before. She just seemed too methodical.
Yeah, and she knew
and-
how to answer everything and how to get out
Yeah,
of things.
she had
and
answers for
author-
everything.
to
She knew
speak
how
to
to keep the
authority and
authorities
everything.
away.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
it makes you wonder how many other people she had hurt throughout, how many more affected. But the fact that she did these things to these kids and these kids died, I mean, I don't even know what happened to the orphans after she left. I mean, who took it over? Where did they go?
They never said what happened to the orphans. They said the place was closed and sold in the summer of 1878.
So they just
They
kick 'em
never
all out
said
and
where
"Have
the
a nice
orphans
life."
went to. They never said, what happened to these children
Mhm.
or anything.
I mean,
Nobody even knows what happened to the kids.
You know what I'm saying? There's so much horrific things that went on in this little area I mean, I can totally see why they say this is probably one of the most, besides out east, far up, like,
And how many children that their lives were absolutely ruined because of this monster.
I just don't get how nobody came and checked up on it, or nobody did anything, and nobody cared. Even some of the other family people who lived in the area who have kids, you think somebody, anything. I don't know. It just doesn't add up. Nothing. Not a lot of the things added up. And it sickens me how much horrific things that took place at that orphanage.
I know. It really boggles your mind.
And
because
then to think that these kids may possibly still be trapped, not trapped there, but stuck there because of their emotions, maybe not knowing to pass on or where to go to because they didn't have, let's say, any faith or, understanding. Who knows? I mean,
well, you know what? At a young age like that and being treated like that and done like that, the only children that really escaped any of this were the children that absolutely did what they were told. And who knows what horrible things they were told to do that these children did just to keep this woman and her cohorts away from them.
Right.
And
sick and twisted things.
I know, it's just sick people. But there have been sick people through the ages.
Well, the thing is like, but that's what I'm saying is that I could see why these children, I don't even know. Maybe their spirits aren't left over there, but it's left over, impressions of such sheer emotions that they were going through that are now, stuck in that bricks in the building down there,
I know. Like I said, some of the things that people have claimed to see in here were ghosts of children in the building and in the yard. In the outbuildings, people have felt their hair and their clothes being tugged. They've gotten pictures of orbs, ectoplasm, ghostly outlines of children, especially in the cellar. I can understand why this place would be haunted, and I really do believe that it probably is.
Or just, and holds over I'm sure it has leftover energy of this sheer emotions. Because think of the torment and the fear and the anger and the depression and the sorrow of what these little kids went through. And that alone, I could see leaving an impression. And some of them staying behind, still reliving through this stuff. That's just
I know. I'm sure there's a lot of residual hauntings in there too, but there apparently are intelligent hauntings in there. And I think it's interesting that people claim that a child will come up and hold their hand. Children are trusting. I don't care what you do to a child, unless you do something really, really horrible. That child will trust you. That child will love you.
Well, they love you unconditionally until they're hurt. And
until they are so hurt that that love is just ripped out of them.
Yeah. Mhm. Because they're willing to be forgiving for the most part for a while, but then after a while when they become broken, it's but even then they still are would reach out. But the thing is, it's not just that, but right outside the area they had the Wade House and that farm place and all the other stuff, and they're seeing things, not just children, but they're seeing Civil War of both sides roaming around the towns. They got, what happened to, and I'm not trying to be crude or gross, and I don't know how else to talk about this, but when there's that many bodies being worked on at one time, and there's, what did you say, 51,000 people died in 3 days, and there's a lot of people being worked on, and they're losing limbs left and right. Where did all these parts go
Well, that was the thing back then. They cut off your limb.
Right.
A lot of soldiers came home, especially Confederate soldiers, and Union soldiers too, went home missing an arm or missing a leg because that was the way they were treated.
But they also died.
Medicine,
a lot of them died right there.
That's the way medicine was then.
Well, no, I know, but they also died right there. So
they died right there
because of that extreme pain and the things that they were going through. That could also, I don't know.
Even medicine wasn't perfected, and they don't get me wrong. They had surgeons back then. They had surgeons that were good for the time, but they weren't out on the battlefield.
No, they're in the hospitals. But I'm talking about just the stuff that they were going through, that that horrendous pain of, just being shot and then just being cut on and then die right there anyway. I could see why, them being left, roaming and stuck there too,
Yeah,
Because there's just such extreme emotions, so many emotions at one time in such a small space.
exactly. Exactly. And this battle affected practically the whole town, like the Cope Farm. The Cope Farm was directly on the battlefield. And people, have claimed of hearing footsteps in this place. I'm not sure what the Cope Farm was used for. I think uh, for all I know, it could have been abandoned. I know I did read that for a while, some soldiers took refuge there, trying to get an advantage over the opposing army. But, this place was directly on the battlefield. Um, like we talked about before, the Devil's Den. This was a place that soldiers thought they could take refuge and maybe get an advantage on, and it actually didn't turn out that way. Plus, when they were there, they were hearing voices and war whoops, from the battle that took place there years ago with the Crow.
The Crow Indians, yeah.
Yeah. So that place was already haunted before the war broke out.
Well, a lot of the people that were fighting the war knew that what the war really was about, and just didn't agree with what was happening. Not because it wasn't all about slavery, either. It was about
No, it wasn't all about slavery, but slavery was an issue.
was a part, but also about the economic rights of the South,
Right.
and how the North was.
Well, they wanted to um, levy their own taxes. They wanted to control their own commerce. And plus their economy did depend on slavery.
Well, right. Well, they were fighting over. Well, see, it was more like the industrialists and everything like that, and it had to do with they wanted them to send their products up there, but then they were trying to tax them and all this other stuff. It was like a huge thing going on, but it wasn't until 1863 really when they decided to throw in the fight for slavery to give more of a morale to the troops to keep going and fighting and feel like they were fighting for something good to keep them going.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them didn't agree with what they were fighting for, and they would say, "See you in hell, Johnny. See you in hell." Whatever. So maybe they're left. The spirits are still there because they're in fear of judgment and they don't want to cross over.
But you had brother fighting against brother. You had relatives fighting against each other, and a lot of the Union soldiers did not side with the Union. They just happened to be on that side.
Well,
there were a lot of Northerners that went down and joined the Confederate States Army because that was the side that they believed in. That was the side that they thought was right.
Right. But there was so much more to this war than what a lot of people are taught nowadays in the history book. You really kind of have to go out, because this is kind of like the second war for independence. It really kind of was a little bit, if you think about it. Because the American people, I mean, we kind of, but a little bit, they lost to centralized government. If you think about what the whole big fight
Well, that's what the whole thing was, a
about.
centralized government, because one of the issues was, the Civil War was to
there was
decide
multiple issues why
there were
this
multiple
fight took
issues.
place, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, you can't really pinpoint just one issue.
Yeah, it wasn't just
But
slavery,
one of the main issues
Mhm.
was that the South
Mhm.
wanted the states
You lose your
to
thought.
create their own rules and regulations, which basically that's what they do now.
Right.
But
that's what I'm saying,
Civil War was to see if it was supposed to decide whether the United States would remain one country or split in two.
Right. And the reason why I was kind of bringing that part up was a lot of people didn't agree with it, and they felt bad for fighting in this war and killing other people, and they believed that they were going to go to hell, so maybe they didn't cross over because they had fear of judgment. So maybe a lot of the spirits that are hanging around is because of their belief system, that they believed that they were going to go to hell. And I'll be right back. Keep talking for a second.
And the South just did not want to give up their way of life. And slavery wasn't a big issue. And I'm not putting down slavery. Don't get me wrong. Okay. I'm not minimizing that particular thing, because I think it's wrong. I think it was wrong back then. I think it's wrong today. But at the time, it wasn't really that big of an issue. The really big issue was taxation.
Right.
And the commerce of products. Each state wanted to regulate their own products.
Right.
And how they were sold and where they were shipped and the taxes on them.
Right.
And some people just did not want to give that up. And like I said, there were Southerners that went and fought with the North because they sided with the North.
Right. Well, but that was one of the reasons why I was talking about there was such a huge emotions and why the war was going on, why people were fighting, and the fear of judgment and everything else. That could be why.
Well, and Robert E. Lee was a very intelligent man, and he was a darn good strategist when it came to war. But he made a mistake. But he had just fought a battle in his own state of Virginia, and it was pretty close to the Pennsylvania state line. And he believed that if he won a battle in the North, that would help the Southern cause. It would end the war earlier, because really the battles did not take place in the North. Very few skirmishes took place in the North. And so he takes 75,000 soldiers up there, and he got his butt whooped.
Right. Well,
and it only took 3 days to do it.
Right. Well, and also, I mean, there's so many things that, okay, the bodies were just left all over.
The bodies were just
left all
there.
over the place, all over the battlefields and stuff. And the people, like we said earlier, who had to take care of it were like the black farm hands or the farmers or whatever. And like you said, the farmers were, angry that they had lost tons of their livestock and crops and buildings and everything else, and they would hold these bodies ransom. Sometimes they wouldn't even give the bodies back. They would just burn
they
them.
would dig as many, the ones that they did bury, they would dig as many as 100 graves in a day.
Right.
100 graves in a day, and they had 51,000 people to bury. And
well, they didn't bury 51,000 total.
They didn't bury them all. Not all of them got buried.
No, they got left. Well, I think the last one of the last ones that they found was in the field was as recent as 1996. But let alone it's not getting proper burials. I mean, I guess that could leave people to wander around that area as well,
Right. Right. And in the National Cemetery,
and then you don't even get a proper burial, burial.
There was one story I found really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It was in the I can't find my note. Found it. In the Gettysburg National Cemetery, there is a man buried there named Captain William Miller. And for years, and everybody believed it was Captain Miller. For years, there was this one kind of an angry spirit around his grave. And I mean, people who would go in here in this cemetery, and when they would get around his grave, they would just get a feeling of fear. Well, a psychic went in there. I think it was in the 1960s. Might have been the 1950s. And she said the reason that Captain Miller was angry was because his Medal of Honor was not listed on his headstone.
So he's come back angry, haunting people because
he's
he didn't
angry.
give his proper.
He's angry because his Medal of Honor was not noted on his headstone. So the town, what is it? The town ruling body, City Hall, whatever it's called nowadays, they all got together and they took a collection to have this carved on his headstone. And they said once that it was carved on his headstone about his Medal of Honor, that there was never another haunting around that grave.
So he finally felt everything was at peace. He could move on then. That he just wanted that recognition for what he felt
wanted
like
that
he
recognition
deserved because of what he fought for. And you know, that's like I said, some spirits stick around because of their anger over something that they just couldn't let go of here earthbound. And that could be another reason why there's so many hauntings in this small area, because of there's so many different things. I mean, they, you know, of why each person.
Well, for almost 100 years, this guy haunted that cemetery until he got what he wanted. But you know what? That's an intelligent haunting. He wanted something. He scared the bejesus out of people to get it. He got it. He's at rest.
Yeah, but it took him that long to figure it out, so.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder how many other people are harassing other people. It's like maybe they're mad because they want their limb back and buried with their body. And being that you don't know whose is whose, they'll forever haunt this town and this area. Let alone all the blood that's soaked into the ground here. I mean, that alone has to leave some type of energy or negative energy or some sort of.
I wonder what they did with the limbs back then when they amputated them.
They said they
did
just
they
tossed
burn them?
No, they just tossed them out. Just tossed
Did they?
them out. Yeah.
Just tossed them out. Let the animals get them, huh? Because
Whatever
I know
happened,
nowadays
you know?
they incinerate them.
Well, yeah, but they did burn. You know, they buried some and they burned a bunch of them because they didn't have time to be out there digging, because everybody, like I said, if you had 51,000, that's what, every 3 seconds somebody was getting shot. So you couldn't really be outdoors unless you were shooting. And it's like some people were never buried. They were just laying out in the field and the ground overcovered them over time.
I was in a cemetery a couple years ago, and it was a cemetery I'd never been in before. And I came across a headstone that said, I can't remember the guy's name, Charles somebody, and it says, "Here lies Charles so-and-so's left leg." So somewhere along, and it was.
So he didn't die, but he gave his leg a burial. He didn't die,
but and the date on there was 1946. In 1946, he had to have his left leg amputated, and he buried it.
Right.
I wonder how common that was.
I don't know. It's not something I've ever researched or looked up. But I guess you can always.
I found it by accident.
Yeah, that'd be something like I could see you checking out. But yeah,
a lot of the things that I read, I find by accident.
I think that's how a lot of us kind of run.
Now there is one haunting by Gettysburg, and it's by the battlefield, and it's a place called Spangler's Spring, and that has absolutely nothing to do with the battle. This is actually in the 1880s. A young woman was involved with a married man. And when he wouldn't leave his wife, she committed suicide. And they say that you can go down by this spring and you will see her walking along the banks of this spring. I just thought I'd throw it in because it is a haunting of Gettysburg.
Yeah, well, it is kind of part of that.
And that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, well, we were talking a little bit about everything. It wasn't just about paranormal. It was going to be, you wanted to talk about Gettysburg. You kind of wanted to talk about these certain topics tonight because you were interested in the history and the things that you read about. So, I mean, like our show isn't always about paranormal. Our show is basically about anything and everything, whatever catches our attention. That's what we talk about. But when you're going to talk about Gettysburg, you certainly have to talk about the hauntings because that is a part of that.
Oh yeah.
I think it's always going to be haunted. Period. Just because of.
Well, like I said, it's everything that I have read about it, and it's arguably the most haunted place in America. And I know that some people will argue that fact, because like I've heard, well, Louisiana or New Orleans is the most haunted place in America. Atchison, Kansas, the entire town is haunted. Quincy, Illinois, as a matter of fact, about 90% of the town is haunted.
So is your backyard. No, just kidding.
So is it my backyard. So is it my attic.
Yeah, your backyard, your attic, the most haunted place ever.
But the thing of it is, I can see why this place would be haunted, because just about it, like I said, it was a small rural town at the time. It was just a farming community. It was out there practically at the time in the middle of nowhere. And this battle affected just about every place in the town.
Well, yeah, the living population was outnumbered 20 to 1 by the dead. I mean, the whole place was covered and spilled with, and I'm not trying to be gruesome, but every church. I mean, like they said, they had to drill holes in the bottoms of every floor just to, and this is the truth, but just to drain out the blood and fluid and stuff, because there was just so many people they were constantly working on, and practically everybody that went in did not make it out. It's just they died horrific, and they were suffering, you know, and like you said, the mini bullets back then didn't kill you like they do nowadays with the high velocity and bullets that they have now, so that you would have a few bullets and you'd still be fighting, and or some of them were wounded in the head and they were just walking around like the Walking Dead until they you know, died of blood loss. I mean, there's so many different...
And you know, you said something that I had never heard before. I thought that I came across just about every little detail about the Civil War, because that's what I like. I like the little details.
Mm-hmm.
Is when you were talking about that they roped off an area, and that's where they put on the battlefield, and that's where they put the people that were shot in the head that were dying and didn't know where they were.
Yeah, some of them were still marching, or some of them were still holding up their gun, like whatever they were doing at that time, they ended up keep doing repetitively because they were stuck in that state because of the wound, but it wasn't enough to kill them, so they had to wait till they
died a slow death.
Right, and you know, they were stuck in that thing, and that's why I think maybe that's why they see a lot of these spirits wandering the fields in these sections, because they're still stuck in that state of, I'm still marching, and I'm still doing this one task that I was doing before I got hit. And that's why people think maybe this is residual, but maybe it's not. Maybe it isn't. I don't know which word. You know, not just the energy stuck there, but actually the spirit's still stuck there doing this same repetitive thing because it doesn't know that it's...
You can go on YouTube. You can go on YouTube and see people's videos that they posted that from when they visited Gettysburg, the battlefield. And I mean, you will see, there was one video that really caught my attention. These people were videoing this one area that was right along a patch of woods. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, these soldiers appeared. And like they
was that the one they had on Unsolved Mysteries? Where they had all these flashes of soldiers coming out of the woods into the field?
They were coming out, going at each other, and then all of a sudden they just disappeared.
Is that the one that they had on Unsolved Mysteries? Like,
I don't know if they had that one on. I don't know if they had that one on Unsolved Mysteries or not. I saw it on YouTube.
Yeah. Well, the person's video. I'm just wondering if it was one of those old. I know a lot of people have said they've caught in those type of apparitions.
And that's like the Devil's Den. You know, people take pictures around that, and their cameras don't work right. And a lot of times, and I thought that was so cool about that friendly soldier that would come out, and they would have a conversation with this guy. And they would take his picture. They thought he was a reenactor. And when they got home and developed their film, nobody was in the picture.
There was this lady that... she was on one of the fields or whatever, and she had taken a picture, I think of her husband or whoever, and they were just, she was just taking pictures of the fields or whatever just to document it and then to make like a photo book or whatever. And in one of her photos, there was a man that looked like, what was his name? I just gapped out. Anyway, she had captured a ghost, like you said, who was in full gear and everything, and I wonder if that was like the same area where people were having this spirit talk to him and tell him stuff, if she had captured that same guy in her photo, because her photo was amazing. I saw it on one of the shows on the History Channel.
I've read
I'm sure
different...
it's on the internet. You could find it.
I've read different stories of people who have visited that battlefield, and just about everybody who visits out there either has seen something or they capture something on their cameras. So... it's, you know, but like I said, you know, there was like 150,000 soldiers there. 1/3 of them died within 3 days. So it does not surprise me that you would have a paranormal encounter there.
Well, and you could always go on with quantum physics. You know, energy can never be lost. It just takes on different form. You know, so you got that playing into form there too. Well, the whole area of Gettysburg, not just the battlefield. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's
Well,
definitely an interesting place, and there's so many other things that people could talk about forever because there's so many different little places there that every single thing is haunted. But like I said, every town was used, or not a town, every building was used, from cellar to barn to house to, you know, anything for protection, just to quickly do a quick pull out of the bullet and surgery and everything that you could.
yeah. And that's like the Weaker house. The barn was used as a makeshift hospital, but before the Union troops even got into that house, Confederate soldiers were using it as a sniper's nest. So I think it was something like 5 or 6 Confederate soldiers were in there. They were not only trying to take refuge in there, they were using it they were up on, I think, the second floor, using this place to get an advantage to shoot Union soldiers.
Yep.
And they were killed before the Union soldiers even took over this house. And they used the barn as a hospital.
Right.
So, and the excuse me, I'm having trouble. And like I said, the Culp farm was directly on the battlefield. The family was driven out of it. There were soldiers that went in there to do the same thing, to get an advantage point so they could take out soldiers. They were killed. One of the hauntings in there, well, the only thing that people ever really report in there are footsteps just coming from nowhere.
Well, they got that train station out, the Gettysburg train station, whatever, and that place is extremely haunted. There's people who will be working on the cars and the box cars and the trains or whatever late at night, and they'll hear footsteps going through the box cars or whatever, or whatever you call those, coaches. My bad, those two. And they would feel like somebody was watching them right there, but they couldn't see them, but they heard them walking around, doors opening and shutting.
Yeah.
You know, people are constantly talking when there's nobody there. People seeing things that aren't really there, and
It's almost like it's almost like every inch of this place is haunted. That you can't that you can't swing a cat without hitting a ghost.
well, I'm never gonna swing a cat, but
Well, I'm not either. It's just an expression. The Hummelbow house. Okay, it was not that big of a house. It was basically used for a basic operating room. But basic operations back then were amputations.
well, that's all it was, butchered. They were chopping and hacking these people's, you know, even if they didn't need it, they were losing limbs.
That was the way to do it, you know. And
Well, they didn't have that
instead
much
of
time either.
they didn't have that much time. That's right. They had wounded coming in left and right. They had wounded coming in that just died waiting to get on the operating table. And then you got to stop and think they didn't have any anesthetic. I mean, they would give them something to bite on, and then they would,
Even then,
you
they
know,
didn't always get that. They just started once you were dropped in, they just worked away at you if they got to you at the end
that's
time.
right. I mean, and your screaming was nothing, you know, but a lot of them passed out from the pain. Very, very few of them, from what I read one time, were awake through the whole thing because the pain would get so intense the doctor knew they were going to pass out.
Ugh. And if it wasn't that, they died from deadly infections.
Yeah, or they died from infection
Is it
because it was a tedious job to take somebody's leg off.
not legs, arms, feet, hands, whatever, just different parts. They were, you know, just everything. It's just the whole everything, every emotion and all the energy from anger to fear to, you know, pain. There's so many intense emotions all in one little setting that you can only imagine what kind of vortex or thing that it would create there because of all that intense energy and emotions and thoughts, and what it could have brought in because some things people believe that darkness is attracted to all that stuff too, for people who believe in that aspect.
Oh, I can
It could
only
have brought in
imagine the dark forces
that it could
walking
have,
that place.
yeah, that it could have drawn in because of the torture that happened to the children and to the soldiers and to the innocent people that were in the town, I'm sure. So there's just so many different factors and so many things that you could take in. And there's so much things that happen that it's beyond someone's imagination creating these things, because now there's too many people catching things on photos nowadays and on digital recorders and everything else that it's hard to disprove it when it's right there in your face.
Well, it's like I said before, if you see it with your own eyes or you capture it on your own camera, is it still a figment of your imagination?
So this would be a cool thing where you should just go, well, you can't really go down there and do a live investigation because they have everything shut down and they don't allow paranormal investigating on fields and stuff, really. But that would be an interesting thing to see if somebody actually had the opportunity to do that, to see what would happen.
I would love to go down there, and I'm hoping to get down there with the next couple years. I just want to go. I just want to go. If nothing else, just to see it. But from what I hear, everybody that goes there has some sort of paranormal experience.
Right.
Some sort.
Well, from
even if it's seeing something, even if it's interacting with something, and there's one area and I've seen a couple pictures from different people of this one area. It's close to the Devil's Den, that every time they take a picture, they always capture a soldier in the picture, and you can see right through the soldier. And the soldier's never in the same place. He might be on one side, and then in this other person's picture, he was on the other side.
Well, maybe it was multiple soldiers appearing, not just one.
Well, that's entirely possible. I'm not saying it's the same soldier, but it just seems like everybody that goes there has some sort of an experience, whether it's minor or whether it's something major. And I don't know if you can really experience that being on an actual tour.
But if you consider the religious...
I always kind of like to wander off on my own.
Yeah, like your
But
thoughts.
some places frown on that because, you pay for a tour. They want you in that tour.
Well, and it's easier for them to keep an eye on people so nobody takes anything, wrecks anything, or destroys anything. But if you consider, like, the religious and the superstitious beliefs of the people back in the Victorian era back then, that alone could make you, believe that's why these souls didn't find peace in the afterlife, because of their beliefs and they didn't want to go to hell, or they didn't want to be judged, or all the different superstitious beliefs that they had. I could see that's another reason why they all keep staying around and don't. Maybe they had the opportunity and saw the light to cross over, but they didn't want to because they were in such fear.
Well, that's true. That could be very, very true. I'd like to, excuse me, I would like to visit the Farnsworth house, that bed and breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
I would kind of like to visit there. Maybe spend a night there. They don't really advertise it as haunted that I could see, but there's over 100 bullet holes in the wall. 150 years and the bullet holes are still there. That kind of boggles my mind too. If it was me, I'd be getting the holes out. I'd be filling the holes up with spackle or something.
Well, like a lot of them, they just left it for the historic effect.
But yeah, well, that's true too. The historical
but what I don't get
value,
is a lot of those guns weren't as powerful as we have nowadays. I'm really surprised that there's so many holes through the brick walls, and that one went through a door, went through that woman's corset, and killed her. I'm like, oh my gosh, that person had been an amazing shot.
And you know what? They had to have been an amazing shot, or they had to had a good rifle. It doesn't say what she was shot with, but you stop and think about it. Corsets back then had bone in them.
Yeah, but it went through
a
wall, a
to
door,
keep the
and
woman standing
her.
up straight, and to keep her in, because they wore corsets to kind of help them,
Yeah,
look a little thinner.
Well, not just that, but it was just a lot of things. But anyway,
it was a lot of things.
Yeah.
It depended on the dress they wore too.
Right.
How it made their dress look and everything. But she might as well have had a bulletproof vest on with that thing, and that bullet still went through it.
but these mini bullets they're like soft lead, and it's just like, they just don't have that much kick to them like things have nowadays. I'm just so surprised. I'm like, maybe she wasn't. It was just, yeah, she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But seriously, for everything to line up the way that it did, it was just maybe that was just her time to go. But what a horrible thing, just.
And she was standing at a kitchen table kneading bread dough.
She wasn't even supposed to be up there. She was supposed to be in the basement with the rest of them.
And she was kneading. She was making bread for the Union troops.
Yeah, I know.
Is what she was doing for the Union soldiers. And when you're making bread, I don't know about you, but I'm bent over a little bit. I mean, it's not like the bullet could have hit her above the corset, because she was kind of bent over.
Well, when I make bread, I just open the bag and pull out a couple slices. And
well,
I'm done.
Me too. When I make bread, I go to the store and buy it.
Yeah, so. Even
I mean, you're not
going to.
I tried that once. Not again.
Well, homemade buns and stuff for holidays, where that's a different story. But every day, yeah. But I don't know. It's just, to me, it makes me think, okay, was this person really outside the door who came in and shot her? Or, to me, it'd be more believable that somebody had opened the door and shot her.
Well, they're saying that she was killed by a Confederate sniper.
Yeah, but just for it to line up, all of that to line up perfectly, and to know the weapons that they had back then, to know the type of ammunition.
Personally, I think it was a lucky shot. I think that he whatever he was shooting at, he missed it.
He was shooting at the guy up in a bunch of them. Soldiers were shooting at the sniper that was upstairs in the attic, shooting down at them. That's what they say was going on. So there was a bunch of people shooting at him, and one of them, for whatever reason, got her.
And then they had to lay her in the cellar for 2 days, and the family's down there with her body, and her sister's down there with a newborn baby, and they're hoping that this battle ends soon so they could bury her. And then her dad, who was declared insane years earlier, would go down there and look for her. He never believed that she was dead, that she was just hiding from him. So, and people have reported seeing this man in the basement of this place looking around as if he's looking for something. And they also say that there's a smell of cigar when they see him. But what they say when they see her, there's always, no matter where in the house they see her, that there's always the smell of bread.
Well, like I said earlier with the smoke smell, I mean, if you smoke in a place long enough and you got firewood, I don't know, it could have been like 20, 30 years since somebody burnt wood in that place. That smoke smell is still stuck in the wood. It comes out just right whenever the temperature's right, conditions in that house. You'll get that whiff of smoke smell again, or you get the whiff of a fire burning in there. So to me, when people smell that stuff, I don't really believe it too much to be paranormal, but the leftover.
I don't know. The bread smell would be paranormal.
Well,
to
the
me.
bread, yeah, I didn't say bread.
But as far as
smoke.
the cigar smell, I want to tell you, when you smoke a cigar,
or smoke a cigarette in a house long enough,
or smoke a cigarette, and you can smoke just one. You can take a shower. You can get dressed. You can smoke a cigarette or smoke a cigar. That smell is with you for a while. So it could have been anybody on that tour that had just smoked, and when they're all in the cellar and they're in close proximity, it could be that person that had just smoked.
Well, yeah, but if you've been at an old farmhouse and they used to have to heat the place, they use wood. You know that after years and years of burning wood, that smoke is trapped in the wood. And then when the temperature's just right at certain times, you can re-smell that smell, even though they haven't been using wood burning in there anymore because they have electric heat or gas heat now. That smell keeps coming out. So when people report in these old houses, I smell smoke, I mean, I don't count that as paranormal. It's hard for me because it's right there still.
Well, there are times
in the wood.
I have to really clean the wood stoves I have here and the fireplaces when winter is over with, because in the middle of summer I can be walking through a room and I'll smell that, and it's not that it's.
Well, you smoke too, so you probably can smell the smoke still in your house in certain rooms, But
I don't smoke in that room. There's only certain rooms I smoke in.
Yeah, that's what I meant, though.
But I can walk through like the living room where there's a fireplace, and I'll smell that. And the first thing I think of is check and see if the electrical is okay, which is brand new. So, but every once in a while I forget, oh, it's probably coming from that fireplace.
Well, another thing is, okay, so people smell the smell of baking bread. My first question is there a bakery nearby?
I don't know.
Is there somebody else in another house who's portraying back then that type of, life where they come in and you see them, this is how we baked, this is how we sewed, this is how we lived. There's certain things that I would want to go.
Oh, I'm sure they have
investigate.
reenactors and stuff all through that town.
Yeah, so that's for
Yeah,
me
I've
as
been
an
to town
investigator. That's
before
what
where
I'd want
people
to do.
dress in period clothing, and they'll be walking the streets, or especially the people that conduct the tours.
Mhm. But see, these are the if I was going to be in a ghost hunting group or team and was a serious investigator, these are the things that I would think about before I would say right away, okay, yes, it's paranormal. Yes, it could be, but more than likely, it's probably maybe there's a bakery going on nearby. Maybe somebody's doing baking bread for a reenactment. The smoke coming out of the house could be coming from the old wood stove, or because the guy smoked pipes and cigars in this place for years and years and years, it's coming out of the walls and wood at the right temperatures. Because it happens at our farmhouse. We don't smoke, and we don't have a fireplace thing there anymore. We use electric. You know what I mean? And we have for years and years and years. So, but I'll go down there sometimes in the summer, indoor, winter, and all of a sudden I just smell smoke. I'm like, whoa,
Yeah, and that happens to me too. And you start looking around, wondering where it's coming from sometimes, and you'll realize, oh, it's coming from the fireplace. Oh, well, it's probably coming from the stove there. So it just,
But that you can't explain.
you can't always believe. I don't know. I don't want to sit here and say you can't always believe that all smells are just because you smell something in a certain place that is paranormal. But you can't dismiss it either.
No, as I said, that's why I would, if I was an investigator, that these are the things that I would go and investigate to make sure it's not this before
Because
I
the haunting in
automatically assume.
yeah, because the haunting in the Jenny Wade house seems to be residual, because nobody has ever said anything about the spirits interacting with anybody. And they never say anything about seeing her sister there or her mother. It's always when they see her apparition, then they smell bread. So I would have to say that it's a pretty safe bet that that's probably paranormal.
Or someone's just really imaginative and can create, that smell in their mind to happen too. There's so many different factors. I always think about this, but I do believe that there is a lot. I do believe in the paranormal. I do believe in spirits and a lot of things that are going on. But there's so many things I'd be thinking at the same time, trying to disprove. And when you can't disprove it, then I'm like, okay. But the fact that people are actually seeing spirits in their face, you know what I mean? Almost so solid everywhere throughout that whole town. There's people who,
Yeah.
almost every building there, at the top of every building is apartment buildings. And people who live there are always saying that they're seeing soldiers and little children all over the place.
Right. Well, even in the Jenny Wade house, okay, there were children from the orphanage that visited that house. Excuse me. And the only intelligent hauntings that seem to be going on there is that when they say a child will walk up and hold their hand, or their clothes will get tugged, or their hair will get tugged. Especially girls with long hair. And now that's an intelligent haunting. That, whatever that is, that's interacting with you.
Oh, yeah.
But they don't say anything about smelling anything at that time either.
Right. But when you're in town and stuff and everything, there's so many things that are going on. It's really hard to narrow down exactly, is it coming from this or is it coming to other places, because it's so close. You know what I mean?
Right.
But the devil's, what do you say? What was it called?
The Devil's Den.
Yeah, now that to me, I'd really want to kind of go check that one out for sure.
That would probably be the first place for me. I mean, as interested as I was in the orphanage, and as much as that caught my attention even more, because there were two battles that took place there. There was a battle with the Crow Indians,
Right.
and then Gettysburg. So that would probably be the first place I'd want to go to.
I'd be more interested in the Crow Indians,
Well,
really,
one of
more
the
so
things
than
that
the
they
Civil
say
War.
that they hear there are war hoops
Mhm.
and drums. And I'm guessing, I don't know this for a fact, but when Indians had battles, they beat drums, but so didn't soldiers. There was
Well,
a drummer.
well, yeah, the war, whatever. But maybe you want to tell people a little bit about next week's show before, because we're coming close to ending right now. We have a couple minutes, so.
Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I want to especially thank our mods, Richard and Penny. And next week, we're going to have Paranormal Talk where we will be discussing personal experiences. So join us next week. Our guest caller is going to be Laces Out, and he will be sharing um, with us his personal experiences from the Myrtles Plantation and Hill House Manor and much more. And I want to thank everyone who came in tonight. We certainly appreciate it.
Yeah, and anybody we do paranormal talk once a month, so anybody who's interested in, coming on and sharing their experiences or photos, videos, EVPs, or whatever, or just, us getting to, maybe wanting to ask us questions or ask the group of people questions, feel free to call in or email us and let us know, and we'll work you in.
And don't be afraid to share us on Facebook.
Yeah, that too. Thanks, everybody.
And I hope everybody has a great week and good night.